An injured veteran bought an abandoned hotel, buried in snow for just $900, thinking he'd found cheap shelter from a world that had forgotten him. But when he finally broke through the ice covering the ballroom doors, what Marcus Chen discovered wasn't just frozen chandeliers and rotting furniture, it was $245 million in gold bars, hidden by criminals who would kill to keep their secret buried forever. Before we explore this incredible true story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, but Marcus Reed was already awake. He'd been staring at the cracked ceiling of his studio apartment for 3 hours, watching shadows shift across water stains that looked like maps of places he'd rather forget. Afghanistan, Syria. The medical tent where they'd told him his left leg would never work the same way again. The discharge office where they'd handed him papers and wished him luck, like luck was something you could carry in your back pocket, along with your disability rating. At 32, Marcus looked like a man who'd lived twice that long. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray at the temples. Scars crisscrossed his arms like a roadmap of bad decisions and worse luck. The worst scar was invisible, the one that made him wake up every night at exactly 2:47, drenched in sweat and reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. He rolled out of bed, his left leg screaming in protest as his feet hit the cold linoleum. The apartment was 800 square feet of someone else's broken dreams, furnished with a mattress on the floor, a card table, and a folding chair he'd bought at a yard sale. The walls were thin enough that he could hear Mrs. Patterson next door, coughing, the same wet cough she'd had for months. The radiator clanged like an angry ghost. The refrigerator hummed off-key. Marcus limped to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face, avoiding his reflection in the cracked mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger anyway, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much, a jaw that stayed clenched even when he was sleeping. 3 bronze stars and a Purple Heart, and this was what he had to show for it. A disability check that barely covered rent in a neighborhood where gunshots were as common as car horns. The eviction notice was still taped to his door, red letters announcing that he had 5 days to come up with $800 or find somewhere else to live. He'd read it so many times he could recite it by memory. The landlord wasn't a bad man, just tired of tenants who couldn't pay their bills. Marcus understood that. He was tired of a lot of things himself. He made coffee with instant grounds and water, heated in a saucepan because the coffee maker had broken 2 weeks ago, and he couldn't afford to replace it. While the water heated, he sorted through the mail he'd been avoiding, bills he couldn't pay, credit card offers for people with better credit, charity requests from veterans organizations that somehow had enough money to send glossy brochures but not enough to actually help veterans. And then he saw it. Buried between a utility shutoff notice and an advertisement for payday loans was a wrinkled flyer, the kind of cheap photocopied paper they tacked to bulletin boards at VA offices and truck stops. The image was grainy, black and white, but it showed a building that took Marcus's breath away. Hotel auction, Timber Ridge Resort, minimum bid $500, as is. Where is? The photograph showed a massive stone building, 6 stories of dark timber and granite that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Even abandoned and covered with snow, it had a dignity that made Marcus think of castles and kings and better times. The windows were dark, but they weren't broken. The roof sagged in places, but it was still intact. Most importantly, it was somewhere else, anywhere else. Marcus stared at the flyer for 10 minutes, coffee growing cold in his hands. $500, minimum bid. He had $637 in his checking account, his entire life savings, money he'd been hoarding for emergencies that seemed to happen every week. If he spent it on a hotel he'd never seen in a town he'd never heard of, he'd have barely enough left for gas money to get there. It was the stupidest idea he'd ever had. Which was saying something, considering he'd volunteered for 3 combat tours and once tried to defuse a bomb with a paperclip and prayer. But something about that building called to him. Maybe it was the way it stood alone against the mountain backdrop, defiant in its emptiness. Maybe it was the desperate hope that if he could find a place to belong, he could start healing. Maybe it was just that he had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the flyer. A man answered on the third ring, voice rough with cigarettes and Colorado mountain air. County Auction Office. Hi, I'm calling about the hotel auction, the Timber Ridge Resort. You want to register as a bidder? Marcus hesitated. This was insane. He was talking about spending his last $600 on a building he'd never seen, in a town that was probably dead for good reason. Yeah, he heard himself say, I want to register. The drive to Timber Ridge took 8 hours through mountain passes that made Marcus's ancient pickup truck wheeze like an old man climbing stairs. He'd bought the Ford 10 years ago when he was still active duty, still young enough to believe that good trucks lasted forever if you took care of them. Now the odometer read 200,000 miles, the heater worked sporadically, and the radio only picked up static and a Christian station that played the same hymns on endless repeat. But it was his truck, and it was still running, and that was more than he could say about most things in his life. The mountain scenery was beautiful in the way that hurt, to look at endless pine forests dusted with snow, peaks that scraped the sky, valleys so deep and green they looked like God's rough drafts for paradise. Marcus had grown up in flat Texas farmland, where the biggest hill was an overpass, and the horizon stretched until it met the sky. This was different. This was landscape with personality, with secrets, with the kind of majesty that made you believe in things you couldn't see. But as he climbed higher into the mountains, the beauty gave way to something sadder. Ghost towns dotted the highway places that had once thrived on mining or logging or tourism, now reduced to empty buildings and faded signs. Gas stations with pumps that hadn't worked in decades. Motels with no vacancy, signs that were permanently dark. Restaurants that had become homes for raccoons and regret. Timber Ridge, when he finally reached it, was the saddest ghost of all. The town stretched along both sides of a highway that probably saw 50 cars on a busy day. Most of the buildings were empty, their windows dark or boarded up with plywood that was gray and warped with age. A few businesses hung on with the stubborn persistence of dandelions growing through sidewalk cracks, a diner with a neon sign that flickered, "Eat," a gas station that looked like it belonged in 1975, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign that read, "If we don't have it, you don't need it." The people Marcus saw moved with the slow resignation of survivors in a disaster zone. An old man pumped gas with movements that suggested every joint hurt. A woman swept snow off the steps of the post office, like she was fighting a battle she'd already lost. Children walked home from school, bundled in coats too big for them, their breath visible in the cold mountain air. This was a town that had been dying for so long that death felt normal, the kind of place where young people left as soon as they could, and old people stayed because they didn't have anywhere else to go. Marcus felt right at home. The county courthouse was a brick building that had probably been impressive when Timber Ridge still believed in its own future. Now it looked tired, with paint peeling around the windows and snow piled against the doors, like the mountain was slowly burying the past. Marcus parked his truck and limped up the concrete steps, his leg aching from the long drive. Inside, the auction was being held in a meeting room that smelled of coffee and disappointment. About 15 people had shown up. Most of them contractors or scrap dealers who'd driven up from Denver to see if there was any salvage value in the town's latest casualty. They looked at Marcus with mild curiosity, another broke veteran chasing a dream he couldn't afford. The auctioneer was a thin man with a mustache that had seen better decades, and a voice that suggested he'd rather be somewhere else. He called the proceedings to order with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have one property today. The Timber Ridge Resort, formerly known as the Alpine Grand Hotel, built in 1978 by Alpine Development Corporation. 150 rooms, ballroom, restaurant, conference facilities, spa services, the whole 9 yards. He gestured to a poster board, covered with faded photographs that showed the hotel in its glory days. Even in the old pictures, it was stunning, elegant stone construction, soaring windows, manicured grounds that looked like something from a luxury magazine. Marcus could imagine guests arriving in expensive cars, bellhops carrying luggage, the sound of laughter echoing from the dining room. Property has been vacant for 15 years following legal complications. The auctioneer continued, county seized it for unpaid taxes in 2018. Sold as is, where is? Buyer responsible for all liens and encumbrances. Minimum bid $500. Do I hear 500? Marcus raised his hand. I have 500. Do I hear 600? Silence. Marcus looked around the room, confused. In a place like Denver or Colorado Springs, a property this size would draw dozens of bidders. Even abandoned, the land alone had to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why wasn't anyone else interested? Do I hear 550? The auctioneer tried. Nothing. The contractors were examining their phones or whispering among themselves. A woman in the front row was reading a paperback novel, like the auction wasn't even happening. 525? 510? Marcus cleared his throat. 900. The auctioneer blinked, like he'd forgotten anyone was actually bidding. Do I hear 1,000? More silence. Someone coughed. A radiator hissed in the corner. Going once for $900. Going twice for $900. The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the wooden block like a gunshot. Sold to the gentleman in the back for $900. That was it. Marcus owned a hotel. The other bidders filed out without a word, shaking their heads and muttering things he couldn't quite hear but could easily imagine. Another crazy veteran who'd lost his mind. Another poor bastard who thought he could fix something that was beyond repair. Another dreamer who'd learned the hard way why nobody else wanted what he'd bought. The auctioneer handed him a stack of papers thick enough to choke a horse and a set of keys that looked like they belonged in a medieval castle. The keys were old brass, tarnished but solid. Heavy in Marcus's palm-like promises, waiting to be kept or broken. Good luck, son, the auctioneer said, and something in his voice suggested Marcus would need it. Property's about 12 miles up Mountain View Road. You can't miss it. It's the only thing up there bigger than a shed. Marcus drove up the mountain in gathering dusk, his truck's headlights carving tunnels through darkness that seemed to swallow the world. The road hadn't been plowed in years, maybe decades, and snow crunched under his tires like broken glass. Pine trees pressed in from both sides, their branches heavy with snow that looked blue in the twilight. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no sirens. No sounds of civilization struggling to survive. Just whined through the trees and the distant howl of something wild and lonely. Marcus had experienced quiet before the desert quiet of Afghanistan, where you could hear your own heartbeat and the click of cooling metal. But this was different. This was the quiet of a place that had been forgotten by the world. When the forest finally opened up, Marcus caught his breath. The Timber Ridge Resort rose from the snow like a sleeping giant. 6 stories of dark stone and timber, with a circular drive choked with drifts and dead trees. Icicles hung from the roof like fangs, some of them 20 feet long and thick as telephone poles. The building was massive, much larger than the auction photos had suggested. It looked like the kind of place where presidents held summit meetings or billionaires threw parties that made the society pages. And it was his. Marcus parked and stepped out into snow that came up to his knees. The cold bit through his jacket immediately, mountain cold that had teeth and claws, and no patience for people who weren't prepared for it. He looked up at the building, trying to comprehend what he'd bought for the price of a used motorcycle. The main entrance was a massive wooden door, flanked by stone columns, carved with pine trees and mountain peaks. Above it, etched in granite, were the words, Alpine Grand Hotel, St. 1978. The lettering was deep and precise, the kind of craftsmanship that cost serious money. This wasn't some roadside motel that had gotten lucky with a fancy name. This was a real resort, the kind of place that charged $500 a night and worth every penny. So why had it sold for $900 total? The brass keys were old but well made, and Marcus tried 3 before finding the right one. The lock turned with surprising ease, as if someone had been maintaining it. The door swung open with a groan that echoed through what had once been an elegant lobby. Inside, Marcus clicked on his flashlight and nearly dropped it. The Timber Ridge Resort wasn't just abandoned. It was preserved, like a museum exhibit or a crime scene that hadn't been disturbed. The lobby stretched upward 3 stories, with a grand staircase sweeping toward a mezzanine level, lined with what had once been shops and restaurants. Dust sheets covered furniture like ghosts. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold and dark, but still magnificent. The registration desk was still intact, with old-fashioned brass fixtures and cubbyholes for room keys. Everything was there. The leather chairs arranged around coffee tables. The oriental rugs that probably cost more than Marcus made in a year. Oil paintings of mountain landscapes, hung in heavy frames. Even the plants were still there, though they'd long since died and turned into brown sculptures of what used to be alive. It was like the guests had simply vanished one day, leaving their playground to the mountain cold and the passage of time. Marcus's footsteps echoed as he explored, each room revealing new mysteries. The dining room held tables for 200, still set with white linens now gray with dust. Crystal glasses caught the light from his flashlight and threw rainbows across the walls. The kitchen was industrial-sized, with walk-in freezers and gas ranges that could feed an army. Stainless steel gleamed under years of dust, and Marcus could imagine the controlled chaos of a busy service. Chefs shouting orders and waiters rushing between tables. Conference rooms still held whiteboards, covered with faded writing he couldn't read. A business center had computers from the 1990s, their screens dark but somehow patient, as if waiting for someone to boot them up and continue whatever work had been interrupted. Gift shops displayed merchandise that looked like it had been abandoned mid-transaction, postcards of mountain views, T-shirts with the hotel logo, snow globes that hadn't been shaken in 15 years. On the second floor, Marcus found guest rooms that took his breath away. These weren't basic hotel accommodations. They were suites, with sitting areas and wet bars and bathrooms that looked like something from a luxury magazine. The beds were king-sized, dressed in linens that had once been white but were now the color of old bones. Windows offered views of the mountains that would have been worth the room rate all by themselves. But it was the third floor that made Marcus truly understand what he'd bought. The elevator didn't work, the power had been cut years ago, but the stairs were solid marble, worn smooth by thousands of feet over the decades. The third floor held the premium suites, rooms with names instead of numbers. The presidential suite, the ambassador's room, the director's quarters. Each had multiple bedrooms, dining areas, and amenities that belonged in millionaire homes rather than hotel rooms. The presidential suite alone was larger than most apartments Marcus had lived in. It had a living room with a stone fireplace, a dining table that could seat 12, a kitchen that looked like it belonged on a cooking show, and a master bedroom with a bed the size of a small country. The bathroom had a jacuzzi tub and a shower with enough heads to wash a basketball team. Who had stayed in rooms like this? What kind of guests paid for this level of luxury in a mountain town that most people had never heard of? Marcus was examining the wet bar in the ambassador's room. It was still stocked with bottles that probably cost more than his truck when he heard something that made his blood freeze, a sound from somewhere else in the building, a door closing, maybe, or footsteps on marble. He clicked off his flashlight and stood perfectly still, listening. Afghanistan had taught him to trust his ears, to distinguish between sounds that meant nothing and sounds that meant trouble. This was trouble. Someone else was in the hotel. Marcus pulled his service pistol from the shoulder holster he still wore out of habit. The Colt .45 was old but reliable, the same weapon he'd carried through 3 tours of combat. He'd hoped never to draw it again in anger, but some skills never rusted. The sound came again, clearer this time. Footsteps on the marble staircase, moving slowly, carefully, like someone trying not to be heard. But Marcus was hearing them anyway, because silence was his specialty, and patience was his weapon. He eased toward the suite's entrance, keeping to the shadows, moving with the deliberate quiet he'd learned in places where noise could get you killed. The footsteps were getting closer, climbing toward the 3rd floor with purpose. Whoever was down there knew the building layout. This wasn't a vagrant looking for shelter or a teenager exploring an abandoned building. This was someone with business here. Marcus reached the hallway just as a flashlight beam swept across the opposite wall. The light was professional grade, bright enough to cut through darkness like a sword. Behind it, he could make out the silhouette of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of tactical awareness that suggested military or police training. The man paused at the top of the stairs, sweeping his light across the hallway. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his Colt ready but not yet visible. He wanted information before he started a gunfight in an abandoned hotel on a mountain where nobody would hear the shots. "I know you're here," the man called out, his voice echoing off the marble walls. The accent was slight but unmistakable, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "I saw your truck in the driveway. Very foolish to come here alone, my friend." Marcus remained silent, calculating his options. The hallway had multiple doorways, plenty of cover, but only one exit unless he wanted to jump from a 3rd-story window. The smart play was to identify the threat, assess the situation, and avoid violence if possible. But if necessary, he was prepared to fight. "You must be the veteran who bought my hotel," the man continued, moving closer to Marcus's position. $900. Very amusing. "I have been watching the auctions for years, waiting for someone foolish enough to actually purchase this place." His hotel? Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. This wasn't a random intruder. This was someone with a connection to the Alpine Grand, someone who'd been watching it, waiting for something. "My name is Viktor Kozlov," the man said, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. He knew that name. Every intelligence briefing in Afghanistan had included updates on high-value targets, and Viktor Kozlov had been on those lists for years. Russian organized crime, money laundering, connections to arms dealers and human traffickers. A man who'd disappeared from law enforcement radar 15 years ago, presumed dead or deep underground. And he was standing 20 feet away in an abandoned hotel that Marcus had just bought for $900. "Come out, soldier," Kozlov called. "We have much to discuss, and I believe you are going to find our conversation very profitable." Marcus stepped into the hallway, his pistol raised and ready. Whatever was happening here, whatever he'd stumbled into by buying this hotel, it was bigger and more dangerous than anything he'd imagined. He'd thought he was purchasing shelter from a world that had forgotten him. Instead, he'd bought his way into a criminal conspiracy that could get him killed. But as he looked at Viktor Kozlov, very much alive, very much in control, and very much interested in having a conversation, Marcus realized something else. For the first time since leaving the army, he felt truly awake. His senses were sharp, his mind clear, his purpose focused. He'd found something worth fighting for, even if he didn't understand what it was yet. The injured veteran who'd bought a snow-buried hotel for $900 was about to discover that some bargains came with prices far higher than money could measure. And somewhere in the frozen depths of the Alpine Grand, a fortune in stolen gold waited to turn a desperate purchase into the most dangerous decision of his life. The standoff in the 3rd-floor hallway stretched like a taut wire, both men aware that one wrong move could shatter everything. Marcus kept his Colt trained on the Russian, while his mind raced through what he knew about Viktor Kozlov. arms dealing, human trafficking, money laundering operations that spanned 3 continents. And according to every intelligence report Marcus had read, the man had been dead for 15 years. "You look surprised to see me," Kozlov said, his hands visible but relaxed, like a man who'd been in similar situations before. "Most people believe I died in a car accident in Montenegro. Very convenient story. Very useful for a man who needed to disappear." Marcus's finger hovered near the trigger. "What do you want?" "What I want," Kozlov replied, "is to understand why someone would pay $900 for a building that has been carefully avoided by everyone else for 15 years. Either you are very brave or very foolish. Maybe both." Kozlov smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I think we should have a conversation, you and I, man to man, soldier to soldier." "You were military?" "Spetsnaz. 8th Independent Brigade. Before I found more profitable work." Kozlov gestured toward the presidential suite. "Shall we discuss this like civilized men? I assure you, if I wanted you dead, you would already be dead." Against every instinct screaming at him to shoot first and ask questions later, Marcus lowered his weapon slightly. Not enough to give Kozlov an opening, but enough to suggest he was willing to listen. They moved into the presidential suite, a space so opulent it felt like stepping into another world. Kozlov settled into a leather armchair that probably cost more than most people's cars, while Marcus remained standing, his back to a wall, his eyes on every exit. "You want to know about this place," Kozlov said. It wasn't a question. "You want to know why a hotel that cost $20 million to build was abandoned overnight. Why it sat empty for 15 years, why nobody else bid at that auction." Marcus said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "The Alpine Grand Hotel was never really a resort," Kozlov began. "Oh, we had guests, wealthy guests, important guests, but they did not come here for skiing or mountain views. They came for privacy, for meetings that could not happen in places where governments watch and listen." He paused, studying Marcus's face. "Tell me, soldier, what do you know about money laundering?" "Enough. Then you understand that moving large amounts of cash requires infrastructure. Banks that do not ask questions, businesses that can justify unusual transactions, properties where important people can meet without attracting attention." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together. "This place was a front. This place was a masterpiece," Kozlov corrected. "For 8 years, the Alpine Grand hosted the most sophisticated financial operation in North America. Arms dealers from Somalia, drug cartels from Colombia, human traffickers from Eastern Europe, oil executives who needed to move profits through Syria. All of them needed their money cleaned. All of them came here." The Russian stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered mountains. "We processed over $2 billion through this hotel, $2 billion in cash that was dirty when it arrived and clean when it left. The government suspected, but they could never prove anything. We were too careful, too professional." "What happened?" Kozlov's reflection in the window showed a man carrying 15 years of regret. "Greed happened. My partners became careless. They started keeping records they should have destroyed. They began to believe they were untouchable, and when the FBI finally built a case strong enough to bring us down." He turned back to Marcus. "I discovered that loyalty is a luxury that disappears when men face life in prison. They sold you out. They tried to, but I had spent my entire adult life preparing for betrayal. When the raid came, I was already gone. My partners found themselves arrested, their accounts seized, their lives destroyed. I found myself free but with nothing except what I had hidden." Marcus's grip tightened on his pistol. "Hidden where?" Kozlov's smile returned, this time with genuine amusement. "You think I am going to tell you my secrets simply because you bought my hotel? We have only just met. Then why are you here? What do you want?" "I am here because 15 years is a long time to spend alone on a mountain, watching a building that contains your entire life's work. I am here because a veteran with nothing to lose just paid $900 to buy my secrets. And I am here because I believe you might be exactly the kind of man I need." Before Marcus could respond, Kozlov was moving toward the door. "Think about what I have told you, soldier. Think about what kind of fortune a man like me might have hidden in a place like this. And think about whether you want to die poor and forgotten, or live rich and powerful." He paused at the threshold. "I will return tomorrow night. If you are still here, we will continue our conversation. If you are not," he shrugged, "then you are wiser than I believed." Marcus spent the night in the manager's office on the first floor, building a fire in the small fireplace and trying to process everything Kozlov had told him. The hotel felt different now, charged with menace and possibility. Every shadow could hide surveillance equipment. Every room could contain evidence of crimes that spanned decades. As he stared into the flames, Marcus pulled out his phone and searched for information about the Alpine Grand Hotel. The results were sparse and sanitized. A few tourism websites from the early 2000s mentioned it as a luxury ski resort. Business journals had brief entries about Alpine Development Corporation, the company that built it. Nothing about raids or arrests or mysterious disappearances. It was as if the hotel's criminal past had been carefully scrubbed from the internet. But Marcus knew how to dig deeper. His years in Army intelligence had taught him to find information that others wanted hidden. He searched for Viktor Kozlov and found dozens of articles from the late 1990s and early 2000s. Russian organized crime, international money laundering, suspected connections to arms dealing and human trafficking. Then, abruptly, the articles stopped. The last mention was from 2009. Kozlov presumed dead in Montenegro car crash. Marcus searched for Alpine Development Corporation and found corporate filings that led to shell companies, that led to offshore accounts, that led nowhere. Classic money laundering structure, designed to obscure the true owners and operators. He was deep in a rabbit hole of corporate records when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or start running." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. But the warning was clear. Someone was watching. Someone with access to his phone number. Someone who knew exactly what he was researching. He spent the rest of the night without sleep, his pistol within reach, listening to the building settle and creak around him. Every sound could be an intruder. Every shadow could hide a threat. By morning, he'd made a decision. He was going to town to get answers. Eleanor Walsh had run the Mountain View Diner for 30 years, serving coffee and comfort food to locals, tourists, and anyone else who found their way to Timber Ridge. The diner was a throwback to a simpler time: red vinyl booths, a black and white checkered floor, and a jukebox that played country music from before country music forgot how to tell stories. Eleanor herself was a woman in her 60s with silver hair, kind eyes, and the sort of no-nonsense demeanor that came from decades of dealing with people at their hungriest and most honest. When Marcus walked in at 8 in the morning, she looked him over with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every type of person there was. "You're the one who bought the hotel," she said, pouring coffee without being asked. "Word travels fast in a small town." Eleanor smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Honey, in a town this small, your business is everyone's business, whether you like it or not. How do you take your eggs? Over easy. And I'd like some information, if you're willing to share it." She studied his face, taking in the scars, the premature gray hair, the way he sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. "Your military." "Was. Army. 3 tours in Afghanistan. My son did 2 tours in Iraq," Eleanor said, her voice softening. "Came home different than he left. PTSD, they called it. Took him 3 years to sleep through the night again." She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. "What do you want to know about the hotel?" "Everything. Why it was abandoned. Why nobody else wanted it. Why people look at me like I just bought a haunted house." Eleanor sighed. "Because in a way, you did. That place has been trouble since the day they started building it. The man who owned it, Viktor Kozlov, He wasn't what you'd call a legitimate businessman. I've heard he disappeared. Disappeared is a nice way to put it, Eleanor said. One day he was there, running his fancy resort, entertaining guests who arrived in private jets and left in the middle of the night. The next day, he was gone. Just vanished. Left everything behind: cars, clothes, even food in the refrigerator. She leaned forward, lowering her voice even though the diner was empty, except for them. The staff found the hotel empty one morning. No note, no explanation. His security team was gone too. It was like the whole operation just evaporated. Marcus sipped his coffee, thinking about his encounter with Kozlov the night before. What did the authorities say? FBI swarmed the place like army ants. Spent months going through every room, every file, every computer. But they never found what they were looking for. Eleanor's eyes met his. And they never found him either. What were they looking for? Money, lots of it. The FBI believed Kozlov was laundering cash for some very dangerous people. Russian mafia, Middle Eastern arms dealers, South American cartels, anyone with dirty money who needed it cleaned. But when he disappeared, so did everything. Bank accounts emptied overnight. Safety deposit boxes cleared out. Offshore holdings transferred to accounts that led nowhere. Eleanor stood to refill his coffee, her movements careful and deliberate. They estimated he moved over $2 billion through that hotel. $2 billion, and when the raid came, they found maybe $10,000 in petty cash. Someone tipped him off. Had to be, but they never figured out who. Half the town worked at that hotel at one time or another: housekeeping, maintenance, kitchen staff, security. Any one of them could have been feeding him information. She sat back down, her expression troubled. What I never understood was why he left everything else behind. His cars alone were worth millions. Art collection, wine cellar, personal belongings. All of it just abandoned. It was like he had minutes to escape, not days. Marcus thought about Kozlov's words from the night before. When the raid came, I was already gone. The Russian had known exactly when to run, which suggested either incredible luck or inside information at the highest levels. Has anyone else tried to buy the hotel? Eleanor shook her head. You're the first person to even register for the auction in 5 years. Most folks around here won't go near that place. They say it's cursed. You don't seem like someone who believes in curses. I believe in patterns, Eleanor said. And the pattern around that hotel is people getting hurt. 3 of Kozlov's security team died in accidents in the months after he disappeared. A journalist who was investigating the story had a heart attack in his hotel room. Perfectly healthy 40-year-old man, no history of heart problems. A federal prosecutor working the case was killed in a car wreck on a straight road in perfect weather. She met his eyes again. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's something else. But smart people stay away from that place. Marcus finished his coffee, his mind racing. One more question. Have you seen anyone else around lately? Anyone asking about the hotel or about me? Eleanor's expression darkened. Funny you should ask. Yesterday afternoon, a man came in here asking questions. Said he was a journalist working on a story about abandoned properties, but he didn't feel like a journalist. What did he feel like? Like someone who hurt people for a living. Marcus paid for his breakfast and drove back to the hotel with Eleanor's warnings echoing in his head. But instead of feeling deterred, he felt energized. Every mystery demanded investigation. Every secret begged to be uncovered. It was the same feeling he'd had in Afghanistan when analyzing intelligence reports, looking for patterns that others missed, connections that revealed enemy operations. The difference was that this time, he was the target. Back at the hotel, Marcus began a systematic search of the building. He'd explored the public spaces the night before, but now he was looking for something else: hidden rooms, secret passages, evidence of the criminal enterprise Kozlov had described. He started with the manager's office, examining every piece of furniture, every filing cabinet, every seemingly innocent decoration. Behind a bookshelf, filled with hospitality industry manuals. He found a safe built into the wall. It was high-end, digital, the kind that would resist anything short of explosives or a very patient safecracker. The second-floor guest rooms revealed nothing unusual, but the third floor was different. These weren't just luxury suites, they were fortress rooms. The walls were thicker than normal construction required. The windows were bulletproof glass, installed so skillfully that it looked like standard glazing. The doors were steel core, not wood, and the locks were military grade. In the presidential suite, Marcus found what he was looking for. Behind a section of wall paneling that looked identical to the rest, his fingers detected a slight difference in texture. He pressed against it and heard a soft click. The panel swung inward, revealing a narrow corridor that ran behind the suite's walls. The corridor was equipped with its own lighting system and ventilation. It stretched the length of the floor, with viewing ports that allowed someone to observe the main hallway and guest rooms without being detected. At intervals, Marcus found equipment that looked like surveillance hardware cameras, listening devices, data storage systems. Someone could monitor every guest, every conversation, every meeting from this hidden space. The corridor ended at another concealed door that opened into what appeared to be a command center. Banks of monitors lined the walls, connected to cameras throughout the hotel. Recording equipment filled custom-built cabinets. Filing systems contained what looked like dossiers on hundreds of people, photographs, financial records, personal information, behavioral profiles. Marcus pulled a file at random and found himself looking at detailed intelligence on a man identified as a Colombian cocaine trafficker. The file contained bank account numbers, transportation schedules, personal habits, and even family photographs. It was the kind of comprehensive surveillance package that intelligence agencies spent months assembling. He opened another file, a Russian arms dealer, another, a Sudanese warlord who needed to move oil profits. Another, a Chinese businessman involved in human trafficking. Page after page of detailed intelligence on people who represented the worst humanity had to offer. But it was the last filing cabinet that made Marcus's blood run cold. The files in this cabinet weren't about criminals, they were about law. Enforcement officers, federal prosecutors, judges, politicians, anyone who might pose a threat to Kozlov's operation. Personal information, financial records, family details, compromising photographs, everything needed to blackmail or intimidate people whose job it was to stop men like Kozlov. And at the front of the collection, in a file marked Active Threats, Marcus found his own name. The file contained his military service record, his medical history, his financial information, even photographs of him arriving at the hotel. Someone had been watching him since before he'd even bid at the auction. Someone knew exactly who he was and why he was here. The file contained one additional item that made his hands shake, a single photograph of Eleanor Walsh taken through the diner window as she served him coffee that morning. Written across the bottom in red ink were the words, "Eliminate if necessary." Marcus was still staring at the photograph when he heard footsteps in the main hallway outside, heavy boots, moving with purpose, not trying to be quiet. He quickly closed the file cabinet and moved to the viewing port that showed the third-floor corridor. 3 men in dark tactical gear were moving room to room, searching systematically. They carried weapons that looked military-grade and moved with the kind of coordination that suggested professional training. These weren't local criminals or opportunistic thieves. These were operators, and they were hunting him. Marcus eased back from the viewing port and considered his options. The hidden corridor was sophisticated, but it was also a trap. If they found the entrance, he'd be cornered with nowhere to run. The smart play was to get out while he still could, to disappear back down the mountain and forget he'd ever heard of the Alpine Grand Hotel. But as he looked at the photograph of Eleanor Walsh marked for elimination, Marcus realized he couldn't run. She'd helped him, shown him kindness, shared information that could put her in danger, and now she was a target because of him. The injured veteran who'd bought a hotel for $900 had stumbled into something far more dangerous than he'd imagined. But he'd also found something worth fighting for, the chance to protect someone who'd shown him humanity in a place where humanity was in short supply. Marcus checked his pistol and began planning his counterattack. He'd been outgunned before, in places where the stakes were life and death. The Alpine Grand Hotel was about to become a battlefield, and this time, he intended to win. Through the viewing port, he watched the tactical team discover the hidden door to his command center. Their leader, a man with the kind of scars that came from professional violence, spoke into a radio headset. "We found his hidey hole. Subject is armed and aware of surveillance. Recommend immediate extraction." The response was too quiet for Marcus to hear, but the team leader's expression told him everything he needed to know. They weren't here to capture him. They were here to eliminate a problem that threatened something much larger than one man's discovery. As the team prepared to breach his hiding place, Marcus realized that buying the Alpine Grand Hotel hadn't just been the worst financial decision of his life. It might have been the last decision of any kind he'd ever make. The secrets hidden in the snow-covered mountain resort were worth killing for, and powerful people had decided that Marcus Reed knew too much to live. The tactical team was 30 seconds from breaching the command center when Marcus made his choice. He wasn't going to wait in a hidden room to be gunned down like a trapped animal. If these men wanted a fight, he'd give them one on his terms. The corridor system was more extensive than he'd initially realized. Following it in the opposite direction from the approaching team, he discovered that it connected to service passages throughout the hotel. Emergency exits, maintenance shafts, and utility corridors created a hidden network that allowed movement between floors without using the main hallways. Marcus had learned urban warfare in Fallujah and Kandahar, places where every building was a potential fortress and every room could hide an enemy. The Alpine Grand Hotel was about to become his personal battlefield, and he intended to use every advantage the architecture provided. He made his way down to the kitchen through a service elevator that still had power, emerging behind the industrial dishwashing station just as he heard the first gunshots from 3 floors above. They'd breached the command center and discovered it was empty. Now they'd be hunting him through 150 rooms of maze-like corridors. But Marcus wasn't thinking about escape anymore. He was thinking about Eleanor Walsh, marked for death because she'd shown kindness to a stranger. He was thinking about Kozlov's words from the night before, about fortunes hidden in places like this. And he was thinking about the sophisticated surveillance operation he'd discovered, designed to gather intelligence on the world's most dangerous criminals. If Kozlov had been laundering money for arms dealers and human traffickers, if he'd been blackmailing law enforcement officials to protect his operation, then somewhere in this hotel was evidence of crimes that spanned decades, evidence that could bring down criminal networks across 3 continents, evidence worth killing for. Marcus moved through the kitchen systematically, looking for anything that might indicate hidden spaces or concealed access points. The kitchen was enormous, designed to serve banquets for hundreds of guests. Industrial freezers, multiple prep stations, storage areas that stretched deep into the building's foundation. It was while examining the largest walk-in freezer that Marcus noticed something odd. The freezer was bigger on the outside than on the inside. The interior space didn't match the external dimensions, which suggested a hidden compartment or false wall. He ran his hands along the interior walls, pressing and probing until he found what he was looking for, a section that gave slightly under pressure. It took him several minutes of searching to locate the release mechanism, a magnetic switch hidden behind a panel that looked like standard electrical equipment. When the wall clicked open, Marcus found himself looking at a stainless steel staircase that descended into darkness. The air that flowed up from below was cold, much colder than the rest of the building, with a sharp, clean smell that reminded him of mountain caves. From somewhere above, he heard boots on marble floors and voices speaking in clipped, professional tones. The tactical team was conducting a floor-by-floor search, and it would only be a matter of time before they worked their way down to the kitchen. Marcus clicked on his flashlight and began descending the steel stairs. The staircase was longer than he'd expected, dropping at least 2 stories below the hotel's foundation. The walls were carved from living rock, suggesting that this space predated the hotel itself. Emergency lighting fixtures were mounted at intervals, but the power had been cut long ago, leaving only shadows and the pale beam of his flashlight to guide the way. At the bottom, Marcus found himself facing a steel door marked with warnings in multiple languages. Authorized personnel only, danger, restricted access. The door was secured with an electronic lock that looked military-grade, its display dark but still powered by some independent system. Marcus examined the lock carefully. It was sophisticated, probably Israeli or German manufacture, the kind of security device used to protect government facilities and corporate research centers. Breaking it would require specialized equipment or extensive knowledge of electronic security systems. But as he played his flashlight over the doorframe, Marcus noticed something that made him smile. A small brass key, different from the ones the auctioneer had given him, was taped to the underside of a conduit pipe. Someone had left it there intentionally, hidden but accessible to anyone who knew where to look. The key didn't fit the electronic lock, but it did open a manual override panel that revealed a simple turnkey mechanism. As soon as Marcus turned the key, the electronic lock clicked open with a soft hiss of pressurized air. The door swung inward to reveal something that stole his breath completely. Marcus stepped into what could only be described as a frozen cathedral. The space was enormous, easily the size of a ballroom, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows above his flashlight beam. Ice coated every surface, creating a crystalline wonderland that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But it wasn't the ice that made Marcus's heart race. It was what lay beneath it. Gold bars, hundreds of them, thousands of them, stacked in precise rows along the walls, each row separated by narrow aisles that allowed access to the treasure. The bars were regulation size, approximately 400 troy ounces each, and they gleamed through the ice like imprisoned sunlight. Marcus moved deeper into the frozen chamber, his footsteps echoing off walls that seemed to stretch forever. Each stack of gold bars reached nearly to his chest, and there were dozens of stacks. He stopped at the nearest row and tried to count, but the numbers quickly became meaningless. Hundreds of bars per stack, dozens of stacks. Millions of dollars in precious metal, frozen in time like some ancient pharaoh's treasure chamber. He pulled out his phone and began taking photographs, documenting everything he could see. Each gold bar was stamped with markings that indicated origin and purity. Some bore the logos of legitimate refineries. Others had Cyrillic lettering that suggested Russian sources. A few were marked with symbols he didn't recognize but that looked Middle Eastern or African. This wasn't just a collection of gold. This was an archive of criminal enterprise, each bar representing money that had been stolen, extorted, or earned through violence and suffering. Arms sales to warlords, human trafficking profits, drug money laundered through legitimate businesses, all of it converted to the most portable and untraceable form of wealth imaginable. Marcus did quick mental calculations based on current gold prices. Each bar was worth approximately $25,000. Conservative count suggested there were at least 10,000 bars in the chamber. The total value was staggering, somewhere north of $250 million. $250 million in stolen gold, hidden beneath an abandoned hotel in the Colorado mountains. What happens next will turn this frozen treasure vault into a deadly trap, reveal why some secrets are worth more than lives, and show us that the greatest fortunes often come with the highest prices. What Marcus discovers about the people who will kill to protect this gold will change everything he thought he knew about justice and survival. If you're on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe, because the most dangerous part of this story is still to come. Marcus was so absorbed in documenting the gold that he almost missed the sound of voices echoing down the steel staircase. The tactical team had found the hidden entrance to the freezer, and they were descending toward his location. He had maybe 2 minutes before they reached the frozen ballroom. But as he prepared to find another way out, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. The ice coating the walls wasn't uniform. In some places, it was thick enough to obscure the gold completely. In others, it was thin enough that individual bars were clearly visible. The inconsistency suggested that different sections of the chamber had been sealed at different times. Following his instincts, Marcus moved toward an area where the ice was thickest. His flashlight revealed what looked like equipment buried beneath the frozen coating: computers, servers, storage devices that had been hastily covered and abandoned. Someone had tried to preserve electronic records along with the physical treasure. The voices were getting closer. Marcus could hear boots on steel stairs, professional chatter about search patterns and containment protocols. These men weren't just hunting him, they were implementing a planned operation to secure the chamber and eliminate witnesses. But Marcus wasn't ready to be eliminated. Not when he'd discovered evidence that could expose decades of international crime. Not when innocent people like Eleanor Walsh were being targeted simply for helping him. He needed to get out of the chamber, but he also needed to ensure that the gold couldn't simply disappear again. If he died here, if the tactical team eliminated him and secured the treasure, then Kozlov and his criminal partners would win. The money would be moved, the evidence would be destroyed, and justice would be buried along with Marcus's body in a frozen tomb. Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a text message to every contact in his directory. Gold, Alpine Grand Hotel basement, $250 million. Tell FBI. Then he activated his phone's emergency beacon, the GPS locator that would broadcast his position to rescue services. The voices were maybe 30 seconds away when Marcus found what he was looking for: a second exit from the chamber. Hidden behind the largest stack of gold bars, a narrow passage led deeper into the mountain. It was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, carved from natural rock, probably a cave system that predated the hotel by thousands of years. Marcus squeezed into the passage just as flashlight beams began sweeping the main chamber behind him. He heard shouts of amazement as the tactical team discovered the gold, followed by radio chatter as they reported their findings to whoever was coordinating the operation. Base, this is Team Leader. We have confirmation. The package is secure. Estimated value exceeds projections. Recommend immediate containment and extraction protocols. The response was too quiet for Marcus to hear, but the team leader's next words chilled his blood. Copy that. All witnesses will be eliminated. No exceptions. The passage Marcus was following angled upward through natural rock formations, following what seemed to be an underground river system that had dried up long ago. His flashlight revealed smooth walls carved by centuries of water flow, creating a tunnel that twisted and turned but generally headed toward the surface. After 20 minutes of crawling and climbing, Marcus emerged through a concealed opening behind a boulder field about half a mile from the hotel. The night air was shockingly cold after the underground chambers, but it was also sweet with the scent of pine trees and freedom. From his position on the mountainside, Marcus could see vehicles surrounding the Alpine Grand Hotel. Black SUVs, tactical trucks. Even what looked like a helicopter landing pad being set up in the circular drive. This wasn't a small operation designed to eliminate one troublesome veteran. This was a full-scale military-style intervention. His phone buzzed with incoming calls and text messages as his emergency beacon began broadcasting. FBI, local sheriff's department, even news organizations were starting to respond to his frantic message about gold hidden in the hotel basement. But Marcus realized that calling for help had also revealed his location to people who wanted him dead. His phone was a tracking device, and professional operators would have no trouble following the signal to his hiding place among the boulders. He powered off the phone and began moving higher up the mountain, using terrain features to mask his movement from the forces below. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to navigate, but also making him visible to anyone with night vision equipment. As he climbed, Marcus's mind raced through everything he'd learned. Kozlov had been telling the truth about the hotel's purpose. It really had been a sophisticated money laundering operation. The gold chamber represented the accumulated profits from years of criminal enterprise. The surveillance files contained blackmail material on law enforcement officers and politicians. But who was coordinating the current operation? The tactical team was too professional to be freelance criminals. Their equipment was military grade, their procedures were textbook, their coordination suggested government-level resources. Either law enforcement agencies were involved in covering up the hotel's secrets, or criminal organizations had access to resources that rivaled government capabilities. Marcus was still pondering these questions when his phone, despite being powered off, vibrated with an incoming call. He stared at the device in confusion. Phones didn't receive calls when they were turned off, unless someone had modified them with specialized equipment. He powered the phone back on and answered the call. "Very impressive, soldier." It was Kozlov's voice, calm and amused. "You found my treasure faster than I expected." "Where are you?" "Watching. I have been watching this mountain for 15 years, and tonight has been the most entertaining evening in quite some time. You managed to locate the gold chamber, evade a professional kill team, and alert half of Colorado to the existence of my little secret." Marcus scanned the darkness around him, looking for any sign of Kozlov's presence. "What do you want?" "I want to make you an offer," Kozlov replied. "The men hunting you work for very dangerous people. They have unlimited resources and no moral constraints. If you continue running, they will eventually catch you. If you surrender, they will kill you after extracting information about what you discovered." "What's the third option?" "Partnership." Kozlov's voice carried a note of genuine respect. "You are clearly a resourceful man. You survived 3 combat tours, found my most carefully guarded secret, and escaped from operators who rarely leave witnesses alive. I could use someone with your skills." Marcus kept moving upward, using the conversation to buy time while he sought better defensive positions. "Partnership in what?" "The gold you discovered represents 15 years of careful accumulation. Money stolen from criminals and terrorists, profits from arms deals and human trafficking, payments from men whose names would terrify you. All of it clean, all of it untraceable, all of it ours, if we can get it out of that chamber before the authorities arrive. You want me to help you steal $250 million. I want you to help me steal $250 million. That was already stolen," Kozlov corrected. "Every bar in that chamber came from blood money. We would not be robbing innocent people. We would be robbing robbers." The offer was tempting in ways Marcus hadn't expected. $250 million would solve every problem he'd ever had. He could buy a house, get treatment for his PTSD, live comfortably for the rest of his life. He could even use the money to help other veterans, to build treatment centers and support programs that the government had failed to provide. But accepting would make him a criminal. A partner in money laundering and theft. Everything he'd fought for, every principle he'd sworn to uphold, would be compromised. "I can't," Marcus said finally. "Whatever that money represents, it's not mine to take." Silence stretched between them like a bridge. Neither man was sure they wanted to cross. "Then you have chosen death," Kozlov said sadly, "because those men down there will not stop hunting you. They will follow you, across continents if necessary. They will threaten anyone who helps you. They will turn your life into a nightmare that ends only when you are buried. Maybe, but at least I'll be buried with a clear conscience. Conscience is a luxury that dead men cannot afford." Kozlov's voice hardened. "But I respect your choice. You are a better man than I ever was." The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone on the mountainside, with nothing but his principles and $250 million reasons to reconsider his decision. In the distance, searchlights were beginning to sweep the slopes around the hotel. Helicopters were converging on the area, their rotors chopping the mountain air like mechanical thunder. The forces hunting him were vast, professional, and utterly committed to eliminating anyone who threatened their secret. Marcus Reed, injured veteran and reluctant hotel owner, was about to discover whether doing the right thing was worth dying for. As he climbed higher into the Colorado wilderness, pursued by killers and haunted by the memory of frozen gold, Marcus realized that some treasures came with prices no amount of money could pay. The question now was whether he was strong enough to pay those prices, or whether the mountain would claim another victim of secrets too dangerous for the world to know. The man who'd bought a hotel for $900 had found a fortune worth $250 million. But as gunfire echoed through the valley below and searchlights swept the darkness around him, Marcus began to understand that the real treasure wasn't hidden in any frozen chamber. It was the choice to do what was right, even when doing what was right might be the last choice he ever made. The gunfire that echoed through the Colorado Valley wasn't random. It was systematic, professional, designed to drive Marcus toward a predetermined kill zone where the tactical team could finish their work without witnesses. But Marcus had spent 3 tours of duty learning how predators thought, how they moved, how they could be defeated by someone who understood their psychology. The mountain terrain favored him in ways his pursuers hadn't anticipated. While they had technology and numbers, Marcus had desperation and intimate knowledge of how to survive when everything was stacked against him. More importantly, he had something to fight for that went beyond his own survival. Eleanor Walsh was down there somewhere, marked for death because she'd shown kindness to a stranger. The gold chamber represented evidence that could expose decades of international crime. And somewhere in the darkness, Viktor Kozlov was watching to see whether a broken veteran had the courage to do what was right when doing right could cost him everything. Marcus moved through the boulder fields like a ghost, using terrain features to mask his heat signature from infrared scopes. He'd learned this kind of evasion in Afghanistan, where Taliban fighters used similar tactics to disappear into mountains that had been hiding warriors for thousands of years. The principles were the same: stay low, move slowly, use natural cover, and never be where the enemy expected you to be. But as he climbed higher, Marcus realized that running wasn't enough. The forces hunting him had resources that could track him across continents. They'd proven they could penetrate government databases, compromise law enforcement communications, and coordinate military-style operations without official oversight. Eventually, they'd find him. And when they did, Eleanor Walsh and anyone else who'd helped him would die along with him. The only way to protect innocent people was to expose the conspiracy completely. To make the truth so public, so undeniable, that killing witnesses would be pointless. Marcus found what he was looking for in a natural cave system about 2 miles from the hotel. The caves were deep enough to provide shelter and concealment, but they also had something more: valuable cellular signal amplification from their proximity to a radio tower on the next ridge. He powered up his phone and began making calls. The first call went to Agent Rebecca Santos at the FBI field office in Denver. Marcus had researched her extensively after leaving the Army. She was one of the few federal agents with a reputation for taking on cases that other law enforcement officers wouldn't touch. Corruption investigations, organized crime prosecutions, international money laundering schemes. If anyone would believe his story, it would be her. Santos answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "This is Agent Santos. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm calling to report the discovery of approximately $250 million in gold bars hidden beneath the Alpine Grand Hotel in Timber Ridge, Colorado. The gold represents profits from international money laundering operations, and there are people trying to kill me to keep this secret buried." Silence on the line. Then, "Mr. Reed, are you under the influence of any substances? Have you been diagnosed with any psychiatric conditions?" Marcus had expected skepticism. "I'm a decorated Army veteran with 3 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. I bought this hotel at a county auction 2 days ago. I have photographs of the gold chamber, documented evidence of surveillance operations, and detailed files on criminal enterprises spanning 3 continents. And people are trying to kill you. Professional operators, military-grade equipment. They've already marked an innocent civilian for elimination, Eleanor Walsh, who runs a diner in Timber Ridge. You need to get protection to her immediately. Agent Santos was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from skeptical to concerned. Mr. Reed, I'm going to need you to send me everything you have. Photos, documents, any evidence you've collected. Can you do that? I'm doing it now. Marcus began uploading files to the email address Santos provided. But you need to understand, these people have inside information. They knew I was investigating before I knew what I was investigating. They may have sources in law enforcement. Are you safe right now? Marcus looked out of the cave toward the searchlights sweeping the mountainside below. Define safe. Can you get to a secure location? A police station, a federal building, somewhere with armed security. The nearest police station is 40 miles away, and I'd have to go through the people hunting me to reach it. I'm better off staying mobile until you can coordinate a response. Agent Santos was quiet again. Then, Mr. Reed, I've received your files. This is incredible. If these photographs are authentic, if this intelligence is real, then you've uncovered one of the largest criminal conspiracies in federal law enforcement history. It's real. All of it. I'm coordinating an immediate response. FBI tactical teams, DEI financial WI, crimes unit, Treasury Department investigators will have helicopters in the air within the hour. What about Eleanor Walsh? Already dispatched. Local sheriff and federal marshals are en route to secure her location. Marcus felt a weight lift from his chest. Eleanor would be protected. The evidence would be preserved. Whatever happened to him now, the truth would survive. But his relief was short-lived. His phone began buzzing with incoming calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Text messages flooded his screen, threats, demands, offers of money in exchange for silence. Someone was monitoring his communications and responding in real time. The most chilling message was the simplest: you have 1 hour to disappear forever. After that, everyone who helped you dies screaming. Marcus powered off his phone and moved deeper into the cave system. If the criminal network could track his calls, they could track his location. He needed to stay mobile until federal reinforcements arrived. But as he prepared to move, Marcus heard something that made his blood freeze: the sound of helicopters approaching the cave entrance. Not federal aircraft, which wouldn't arrive for another 40 minutes, but smaller, faster craft that moved with the precision of military assault teams. Through a gap in the cave entrance, Marcus could see rappelling ropes dropping from the aircraft. Professional operators in full tactical gear were fast roping onto the mountainside, spreading out in a coordinated search pattern. They had night vision, thermal imaging, and communications equipment that allowed them to coordinate their movements like a single predatory organism. Marcus counted at least 12 operators, all heavily armed, all moving with the kind of disciplined precision that suggested extensive military training. This wasn't a desperate last-ditch effort to silence him. This was a full-scale military operation designed to eliminate every trace of his investigation. But Marcus had learned something important during his years in combat. Overwhelming force could be defeated by superior intelligence and tactical patience. The operators were better equipped, but they were also operating in unfamiliar terrain while he was fighting for his life on ground he'd been studying for hours. The cave system was more extensive than his pursuers realized. What looked like a simple shelter was actually part of a network that stretched deep into the mountain, connecting to abandoned mining tunnels and natural passages carved by underground streams. Marcus had spent his time in the caves memorizing the layout, identifying choke points and escape routes. Now he began using that knowledge systematically. The first operator who entered the cave system was Moving Point, clearing corners with his weapon raised and his attention focused forward. He never saw Marcus dropping from a natural ledge 20 feet behind him. The tactical knife that had served Marcus through 3 combat tours found its target silently, professionally. 1 down, 11 to go. Marcus stripped the dead man's equipment, night vision goggles, tactical radio, extra ammunition, and melted back into the shadows. The operator's radio crackled with position reports from the rest of the team. They were moving in a standard search pattern, but they were also getting spread out as the cave system forced them to split up. Marcus used their own tactics against them. He monitored their radio communications to track their positions, then struck at isolated operators before disappearing back into passages they didn't know existed. One by one, he eliminated threats while avoiding direct confrontation with the main force. It was ugly work, the kind of close-quarters combat that left no room for mercy or hesitation. But Marcus had learned these skills in places where hesitation meant death, and tonight the stakes were just as high. If these operators succeeded in their mission, evidence of decades of international crime would disappear forever. By the time federal helicopters began appearing on the horizon, Marcus had reduced the threat to 3 surviving operators, who'd retreated to defensive positions near the cave entrance. They were pinned down, outflanked, and cut off from their extraction aircraft. Agent Santos's voice came through the tactical radio Marcus had taken from the first operator. "This is FBI. You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and surrender immediately." The response was a burst of automatic weapons fire that echoed through the mountain valley like thunder. The firefight that followed was brief but vicious. Federal tactical teams had training and legal authority, but the surviving operators fought with the desperation of men who knew capture meant life in prison. When the shooting finally stopped, the mountainside was littered with bodies, and the smell of gunpowder hung in the air like incense at a violent altar. Marcus emerged from the cave system with his hands visible, his own weapon holstered, moving slowly toward the federal agents who had finally arrived. Agent Santos was a woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She studied Marcus with the professional assessment of someone who'd spent years distinguishing between criminals and heroes. "Mr. Reed, that's me. Are you injured?" Marcus looked down at himself, surprised to discover he was covered in blood that wasn't his own. "I'm fine. What about Eleanor Walsh?" "Safe. In protective custody, along with 6 other civilians who had contact with you. We're treating this as a witness protection case until we understand the full scope of the conspiracy." Agent Santos gestured toward the hotel, where federal vehicles were converging like army ants responding to a threat. "What you've uncovered here, it's bigger than anything we've seen before. International money laundering, corruption of federal officials, evidence of arms, trafficking and human trafficking operations spanning 3 decades. What about the gold? Secured. Treasury agents are conducting a full inventory, but preliminary estimates suggest you were conservative in your assessment. Current value appears to be closer to $300 million. Marcus felt his knees buckle slightly. $300 million, an amount of money so vast it was difficult to comprehend. "Mr. Reed," Agent Santos continued, "I need you to understand what you've accomplished here. The intelligence you gathered, the risks you took, the evidence you preserved, it's going to result in the largest organized crime prosecution in federal history. We're talking about dismantling criminal networks on 3 continents." She paused, studying his expression. "The question now is what happens next. Legally, you have a claim to the property where the gold was discovered. The government will seize it as evidence, but there are federal statutes that provide compensation for citizens who assist in major criminal investigations. Compensation? Reward money, potentially millions of dollars. Enough to set you up for life." Marcus thought about that for a moment. Millions of dollars as a reward for doing what any decent person would do when confronted with evidence of massive criminal enterprise. It felt wrong somehow, like accepting payment for basic human decency. "I don't want the money," he said finally. "Not for myself." Agent Santos raised an eyebrow. "What do you want?" "I want it used for something that matters. Something that helps people who've been forgotten." Over the next 6 months, the Alpine Grand Hotel was transformed from a monument to criminal enterprise into something entirely different. Federal seizure laws allowed the government to confiscate properties used in criminal activity, but those same laws contained provisions for converting seized assets into public good. Marcus worked with federal prosecutors, victim advocacy groups, and veteran service organizations to create something unprecedented. A comprehensive treatment and rehabilitation center specifically designed for combat veterans struggling with PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and other invisible wounds of war. The hotel's 150 rooms became private quarters for veterans participating in long-term residential treatment programs. The dining room was converted into a therapeutic community space where men and women who had served their country could share their experiences without judgment. The ballroom, thoroughly cleaned and heated, became a meeting space for group therapy sessions, educational workshops, and social events designed to rebuild the social connections that war had severed. The Gold itself funded revolutionary treatment programs that the Veterans Administration had never been able to afford. Virtual reality therapy that allowed veterans to confront their traumatic memories in controlled environments, service, dog training programs that paired veterans with animals specially trained to recognize and respond to PTSD episodes, job training initiatives that helped former soldiers transition to civilian careers that utilized their military skills. Marcus found himself serving as the center's director, a role that paid modestly but came with something far more valuable than money: purpose. He had discovered what he'd been searching for since leaving the army, a way to serve that made a difference in people's lives. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd bought a hotel for $900, hoping to find shelter from a world that had forgotten his service. Instead, he discovered a fortune that allowed him to build shelter for thousands of other forgotten veterans. Viktor Kozlov had been arrested during the federal raids on the hotel, but his cooperation with international investigators had impressed prosecutors. He provided testimony that led to the dismantling of money laundering operations in 12 countries and the arrest of over 200 individuals involved in arms trafficking, human trafficking, and international drug smuggling. In exchange for his cooperation, Kozlov received a reduced sentence and the opportunity to use his financial expertise to help manage the foundation that had grown from the seized assets. He insisted that his knowledge of international banking and investment strategy be used to ensure the gold-derived funds were managed responsibly for maximum long-term impact. "I spent my career helping criminals move money," Kozlov told Marcus during one of their weekly planning meetings. "Perhaps it is time I learned to help good people instead." The Timber Ridge Veterans Center, as it came to be known, opened exactly 1 year after Marcus had first climbed those snowy steps to the Alpine Grand Hotel. The dedication ceremony drew veterans from across the country, along with their families, friends, and the kind of people who understood that healing was a community effort. Eleanor Walsh catered the opening event, bringing the same warmth and comfort food that had sustained Timber Ridge through decades of economic hardship. She'd become something of a local celebrity after her role in exposing the criminal conspiracy, but she remained the kind of person who believed the best way to help others was simply to feed them well. "You know," she told Marcus, as they watched veterans and their families exploring their new home, "when you bought that hotel, I thought you were just another broken soldier who'd lost his way." Marcus laughed. Watching a group of former Marines teaching their children to play pool in what had once been Kozlov's surveillance command center. "What do you think now?" Eleanor smiled, the kind of expression that contained years of wisdom earned through experience. "I think sometimes being broken is the first step toward building something beautiful." That evening, as the last guests departed and the mountain sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, Marcus walked through the halls of what had once been a monument to criminal greed. Now it echoed with different sounds: laughter instead of conspiracy, hope instead of fear, healing instead of harm. He paused at a memorial wall that hadn't existed during the hotel's criminal years. Photographs of fallen service members lined the corridor, each image representing a life cut short in service to something larger than personal gain. But surrounding those images of loss were pictures of healing veterans graduating from treatment programs, former soldiers starting new careers, families reunited after years of struggle with invisible wounds. Marcus stopped at one photograph in particular, a young woman named Sarah Martinez, who'd lost her memory to a traumatic brain injury in Iraq but had regained enough cognitive function through the center's programs to recognize her children again. Below her picture was a note she'd written in careful, childlike handwriting. "Thank you for giving me back my family." That note, more than any medal or commendation he'd received during his military service, represented what Marcus had been searching for since coming home from war. Not recognition or reward, but the simple knowledge that his actions had made someone else's life better. His phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Santos, who'd become a friend during the investigation and prosecution phases. Kozlov sentencing today. 15 years, eligible for parole in 7 with good behavior. He says to tell you, the gold was always meant to help warriors find peace. He just needed someone to show him how. Marcus smiled and pocketed the phone. He understood what Kozlov had meant. Money was just metal, valuable only because people agreed it was valuable. But purpose was priceless. Purpose was what transformed broken soldiers into healers, criminal enterprises into community resources, and despair into hope. As he made his final rounds through the center, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd bought a hotel for $900 and discovered a fortune worth hundreds of millions. But the real treasure hadn't been hidden in any frozen chamber or secret vault. The real treasure was the realization that everyone, no matter how broken, how forgotten, how lost, deserved a second chance. And sometimes, if you were very brave and very lucky, you got to be the person who provided those chances to others. A year later, Marcus stood before a congressional committee investigating military veterans' health care, holding a photograph of the Timber Ridge Veterans Center in full operation. Behind him sat 20 former patients, men and women who had arrived broken and were leaving whole. "The question you're asking," Marcus told the assembled senators and representatives, "is how to better serve veterans who've sacrificed everything for this country. I'm here to tell you that the answer isn't complicated. It just requires the courage to believe that people are worth saving." He gestured to the photograph. This center was built with money stolen from criminals and terrorists. Money that represented the worst humanity had to offer. But we turned it into something that represents the best hope, healing, and second chances for people who earned them with their blood and their service. The committee chair, a veteran herself, leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, what would you say to someone who thinks this kind of comprehensive care is too expensive, that the government can't afford to provide this level of support to all veterans who need it?" Marcus looked out at the committee, at the cameras broadcasting the hearing to the nation, at the opportunity to speak for thousands of veterans who had no voice in these halls of power. "I'd say that we found $300 million buried under a hotel that nobody wanted. If criminals and terrorists can accumulate that kind of wealth through violence and suffering, then surely the greatest nation on earth can find the resources to heal the people who defend it." He paused, thinking of all the veterans who would never have the chance to find healing, who would continue to struggle with invisible wounds in a world that had moved on from their wars. "The real question isn't whether we can afford to help them," Marcus said. "The question is whether we can afford not to." 6 months later, Congress passed the Timber Ridge Veterans Care Act, providing federal funding for comprehensive treatment centers modeled on Marcus's program. The legislation was signed into law in a ceremony attended by veterans, their families, and the kind of politicians who understood that some fights were worth having, regardless of their political cost. Marcus didn't attend the signing ceremony. He was too busy doing the work that had given his life, meaning helping broken warriors find their way home. Anyone can discover treasure if they're willing to dig deep enough and brave enough to share what they find. As the Colorado sun set behind the mountains that had hidden so many secrets, Marcus Reed no longer felt like a soldier without a war or a veteran without a home. He felt like a man who had finally found his mission, not to destroy, but to heal, not to take, but to give, not to hide from his wounds, but to help others find the strength to overcome theirs. The injured veteran who had bought a snow-buried hotel for $900 had indeed found gold worth hundreds of millions. But the real fortune was the lives he'd helped rebuild, the families he'd reunited, the warriors he'd helped transform into healers. Because for Marcus, and for every person who walked through those doors seeking hope, the greatest treasures weren't buried in frozen chambers or hidden in secret vaults. They were found in second chances, in communities that cared, and in the unshakable belief that no one, no matter how broken, how forgotten, how lost, was beyond redemption. The man who had once slept in his truck because he couldn't afford rent now helped hundreds of veterans find not just shelter, but home. The soldier who had once felt abandoned by his country now helped ensure that no veteran would ever fight their battles alone. And in the mountains of Colorado, where criminals had once hidden their blood money, wounded warriors now found the peace they'd earned with their service and their sacrifice. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of hidden treasures and second chances are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe everyone deserves a chance to come home.